Hi everyone, it was great to see you all last week at the COSA conference at Seaside. Jen and I are back with a debrief for you from our Curious Leadership session. Hey Jen, how's it going?
Oh, great. I'm just really excited to lean into this. And for people who weren't able to attend for whatever reason, they also get to know a little bit about what we do and some of the key takeaways that we found emerging not only just from this workshop, but just across the nation, really. A lot of conversations that we've had have resonated and have an alignment to what bubbled up during our breakout.
So for those of you who were there, this is a reminder of what our session was about. And if you didn't get a chance to see our session, this will give you an opportunity to just kind of take a look into it. We were appealing to educational leaders who were curious about emotional intelligence and social emotional learning. We work with a strengths-based framework and create the opportunity to find clarity on identifying ideas to help you reopen schools.
All right, and I think we're gonna be yep, there they are. You wanna walk us through what we were able to capture? So exciting.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun connecting. This session was very interactive and allowed people to really meet each other and network with one another and share ideas. So here at the beginning, we played some games around social emotional learning to kind of get to know each other. And then we went into a crowdsourcing session, excuse me, which is really the meat of what we do. And we only had 1 hour to do this. Normally, Jennifer and I spend a half day professional development doing this kind of work and really allow our participants the time to really sink into the content, have a lot of thought going and a lot of new ideas spinning. And this was such a short amount of time to do that. And we were still able to see a lot of ideas start to blossom.
Yes, and, for the PD, yeah, we could do the half day, full day, and we even do action planning that can take you through a journey for, like, an entire year or beyond.
Yeah, and one of our participants on that day said, I need another 7 minutes. And I said, you need another half day. So really our intention was just to give the administrators a taste of what we do in that hour and hoping that it inspired you to make some great new ideas in your district, in your community, and yeah, I want to move forward from there.
Great.
So, like you were saying, Jen, you're seeing this across the nation, and we themed out a lot of what we took off of those posters and put it into a word cloud. And the number one need right now is conversations, to really be talking about what each individual school and each individual district need at the moment.
And looking at this, yes, conversations are of utmost important, but what kind? And it's conversations around social emotional learning, emotional intelligence with all stakeholders, with teachers, with students, with parents, family, community engagement, and being transparent and really having positive conversations that ultimately lead to lots of inclusion and access to the resources that the schools have. So let's see what that look like across the different frameworks that we have.
Yeah, and as we know, Jen, it really starts with the administrators, right? Like without the administrators embracing these types of conversations, they don't happen at the school system. So it's wonderful that we saw so many of you at our session last week, and we hope that you continue having positive conversations. The framework that we brought to you was a return to education. And this is something that Jennifer and I came up with, thinking about how to shift education from what it was to what it can be moving forward. And since we just, had this pandemic kind of turn everything upside down for us, this is an amazing opportunity for us to really make some shifts in our education system for the positive.
Yes, and what we came to realize is that every program, every speaker, every organization has their own framework. And we were inspired to have something that is like a checkoff list. And, when you are coming back to school, do all of your initiatives, do your decision makers, keep these in mind as we come back in August, September.
So Jennifer and I have gone through this framework and we have bulleted out what we feel is for each one. So we have bullet points for resilient and bullet points for equitable. But during this session at the Seaside conference, we asked our participants to tell us what they thought resilience meant to them and their school communities. And so that's what we're about to dive into here. This is resilient. There's 3 posters here. One for the building level. What does resilient look like at the building level? What does it look like within the district? And what does it look like for families and community? And there was one group working on this, writing up their thoughts. And then they went around and they had one person stay and they went around and looked at all the other posters. And then those who were coming by could put a star next to it or add on to it, or whatever they thought belonged there in addition to what was already there.
And we always do these debriefings with the schools. We find it extremely valuable and important and essential, actually, that whatever bubbles up, it gets captured, it becomes an artifact, and that's the transparency, because exactly what they produce is exactly what you're seeing here.
Yeah, so the day after the conference, Jennifer and I started sorting through these posters and seeing what bubbled up, and here's what we came up with. In Resilient, we noticed that the main themes were around mindsets. How the teachers, how the students, how the administration thought of what they were doing and what perspective they take. We saw a lot around restorative practices and PBIS, and we heard a lot of that at the conference as well. And then, of course, supportive relationships, both for the students, for the teachers, for the admin, for the families.
And then what we were doing is, that's a really fun part of our work, is to collaborate. And once we see these themes emerge, well, from our 35 plus years combined in the classroom and with our trainings and experiencing, what would we love to see and what would we love to work with and play in your sandbox, so to speak. And so if you want to talk about what we came up with for some recommendations.
Yeah, so in looking at the mindsets, we talked about starting with transparent self-compassion. So really, making yourself vulnerable when you make mistakes and owning it, but not only owning it for yourself, making that apparent to others. So when I taught in my classroom, my early years, if somebody had told me I made a mistake, I would try to cover it up because it was just too embarrassing. I couldn't admit it. But as I really worked through my own emotional intelligence, I learned that when I could own my mistake and say, you know what, I totally messed up. Thank you for catching that. Thank you for helping me out with it. Let's work together to fix that. My students started learning that it was okay to make mistakes. And they also learned how to repair their mistakes and learn from their mistakes. So having that transparency, but start with yourself, model it, and speak about it. I call that like a think aloud, right?
Yes. And the next one would be modeling the positive interactions openly. And what does that mean is that if we want to see that with teachers and students in the classroom, you have the opportunity as building leaders to create those types of conversations that you would like to have and really set some intentions and have the power to shift some of the energy on, well, what does that look like within our school building or within the district?
Yeah, and there's going to be times when we don't agree with our coworkers, right? Or we're not happy with our coworkers, but we can still model positive interactions to work through that. And our students see it, whether we think they do or not. They see it, they feel it. So they're watching us all the time. Those kids always have eyes on us. Relationship support, we talked about shifting to a language of appreciation. So, it's often, I want to say, just kind of our knee-jerk reaction to say don't do this or no. And there's been studies around how many times in a day kids hear the negative no or don't. And learning to shift to a language of appreciation. So saying, you know, do, or I don't know, give me, it's so hard for me to like just say it. But when I do it myself, here's an example. In the hallways, when I first started teaching, teachers would often say, don't run. And students would hear the last word, they would hear run, plus there was a negative in there. And we had training to learn how to speak with appreciation. So we shifted that to please walk, or even just walk. And that's what the students started hearing. And that made a big difference.
And if you see a student doing the activity, the behavior that you want, and say, thank you so much, Malcolm, for walking in the hallway. That keeps us safe, and you're very clear. So we do the same thing with our faculty as well.
Yes. And I have a hard time, like I said, just explaining it, because at this point it's become so ingrained in me that that's just the language that I have. But it wasn't that easy in the beginning. I really had to work at it. I really had to be taught how to speak that way. And I would catch myself and make a shift. So, you know, progress, small little bits of progress on that.
Yes. And we have strategies for that. All right. The next one.
Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was just going to say we have strategies with our PD on how to frame things and flip it from the negative to the positive.
Yes.
And on to the next one, the E.
So equitable, you can see here that there were a lot of thoughts around equitable, all at the building, district, and family and community levels. And here's what we themed out. Access to programs, access for teachers, access for students, making sure that what they need is available. And that leads us back down to get what they need. So not only do they need programs, but what do they need to be successful? Do they need a quiet place to be working? Do they need to be interacting with others? Do they need technology? Like, find out what your staff needs, find out what your students need, and let's work to provide that. And then of course, consistent messaging. You want to go into the recommendations there, Jen?
Sure. So in taking those 3 top burger dots, how do we construct that into a narrative that would be meaningful for you all as educational leaders? Is that to build the trust and to allow all families to feel comfortable to come in. How do you do that is through conversations that are positive and proactive right from the beginning. What could you be doing this summer so that all families are really bought in? And how can you create those opportunities so everyone can participate in those conversations? And then finally, you may want to revisit your vision and mission statements. What words do you have in there that are essential to a positive culture for all students and all stakeholders?
Yeah, and Jennifer, I remember in our discussing this when we were thinking about proactive conversations and opportunities for active listening, we found that a lot of students or families didn't have access to programs and they weren't getting what they needed because they didn't know that it even existed. So making sure that that communication is clear, and even if you are communicating, if they're not listening because they don't trust, then it doesn't matter how much we communicate. So really creating, building those relationships to make sure that they are able to hear what you are putting out there and have those proactive conversations.
And that comes along with the consistency. I mean, we found in building relationships with schools, sometimes it takes 5 to 7 touch points. So it's not enough to send out one email or make one phone call blast, that 5 to 7. But then once you do that and their first experience is positive and you keep on doing that, that's the key.
Yeah, and a lot of people often feel, you know, that big organizations, schools, bureaucracies are just saying stuff, but not actually listening or following through, right? Like, okay, well, do you want to see A, B, or C? And everybody says C, and then it never happens, kind of thing. So that's also part of the consistent messaging and making sure that we're actively listening and letting them know, hey, we hear you, and here's, see, let's show you that we heard you, right? And that's part of building that relationship. Yeah. All right, so the next one was transformational. This one was a little bit less information on here. We had a gap in groups, so they didn't have as much time. And I'm really curious to know if people had more time with this, what would they have come up with? Because there's a lot of transformation happening right now in the world.
And I think that is maybe even part of it too, is we were asking, what do you want when you are going back to school? And we were even saying possibly, were we to work with your schools and say, we're curious as to why there was the least amount of writing on those papers. And we were guessing, could it be that there's already been so much transformation, and to invite even more of that, maybe we need to restore a little bit of order out of that chaos, right? And so that's what we could do for you all next year. So that being said, what did we find, Heidi?
Well, we heard a resounding number of people asking for multi-tiered support systems and social emotional learning. Not only did we see that on the posters, we heard that throughout the conference over and over again. We heard that in the conversations that we had with people. So that is definitely something that people are looking for to bring to schools as part of transforming as they reopen. Also resources, finding the right resources to support their needs, and then defining systems with clarity. So our recommendations on that with MTSS and SEL, finding robust professional development that has those really rich conversations and really allows you and your school, your district to dive into what SEL looks like as a culture and a climate in your area. It's not the same for everybody. It's not as simple as just one curriculum. Although curriculum is good and can be very helpful, that's not the magic bullet. It's really very complex and individualized. And Jennifer and I do a lot of work with schools around that. Resources, there's a ton of resources out there right now. We heard from Oregon Education Association. They have a lot of grants that they're offering, but there's also grants at a nation level, right? A national level and even a state level. Like there's just all sorts of money everywhere right now for social emotional learning, for repairing whatever was lost during the pandemic. And a lot of that is short term. However, if we do that well, especially the way Jen and I do our professional development, we teach you how to fish. We don't just hand you the fish on a platter and say, okay, here you have it for 3 years, and then we're going to take it away and you're going to flounder. No, pardon the pun with the flounder there.
To it.
Instead, we teach you how to do it so that after 3 to 5 years, we step away and you are sustainable with your social emotional learning. And you can continue to grow and shift and change on your own because we've taught you how to do that in a whole systems way.
Yes. And lastly, the designing the summits to explore your why. There's been, we were referring to it before, so many shifts and pivots. And sometimes you just need to tap in and ground yourself and ask these mindful questions. What do we want to keep? What do we want to leave? What is still relevant? What is still applicable? And that the only way to really do that is to facilitate those conversations. And it's all designed specifically around the words that are most energizing to your faculty and staff and community.
Absolutely. So the U stands for uplifting, and we saw a lot of fun drawings on this one. We had asked our participants to either write words and phrases or actually draw, and I loved little drawings on this one. So our theme for uplifting, we saw a lot of positive language, a lot of support for one another. We saw vibrant social engagement, and that has a lot of inclusion involved in that. And then cultures of emotional connection and play, being, kid-like again, and just having fun with it.
And you'll hear too, in the different framework words, there's a bleed through. It's not like one is in one box and one's another. You'll see that there's some harmony and alignment. And I think you can see that in these 3 recommendations. You're going to start to hear a pattern emerge.
You want to go with it, Jen?
Sure, I can. So again, it's about the conversations and how do you choose the words to create the world that you want these students to live in and the families and teachers. And to that end, if you include as many stakeholders as possible in that, then you have that engagement, you have that buy-in. If anybody is asked for their opinion and it's solicited, then when the decision is being made, even if it doesn't go their way, they feel, well, I was still contributing and I can respect if it went into a different direction. And just the law of averages, eventually, if you keep on including them in the conversations, their input, they'll see that it's being honored because you're consistent. And then the last one with the EQ rich events, would you like to speak to that? Because I know that's your big passion.
It totally is. Yeah, just having a lot of opportunities to play with EQ, with emotional intelligence, and with facilitation, because if we just, provide a lesson or provide an activity, but we don't actually walk through the why behind it, how it's working, why it's working, then it just kind of goes over the heads of most. So making sure that we have skilled people who, EQ skilled people who can identify what's going on in that and the depth of it, so that we can have those think alouds and really allow it to sink in for others. I want to go back to the enlist all stakeholders in decision making. I went to the school once a while back, and when I interviewed for the job, there were students on the panel, on the interview panel. There were also parents and teachers and administrators, and it was really nice to see so many people involved with that and making the decision. And then that was when I lived in California. And then just this year, at the end of the school year, they were looking for a new principal at my daughter's school, and some students were able to be on that panel as well. And I think it's really important because, those students are interacting with their principal also, and the students are interacting with their teachers also. And so really thinking, when we say all stakeholders, we're not just talking about enlist the teachers and the admin, we're talking about all stakeholders.
And that even gives me an idea that they may even want to consider having panels as part of their PD with the students or with the families, right? All right, we've got, go ahead.
I was going to say students know what they need. Mm-hmm.
Especially if you teach them to learn how to ask for it and that they're worth it, right? All right, the last 2.
Go ahead, Jen.
Relevant. So a lot of these, it's smaller there because they were, when you see the Post-it notes, it meant that other groups were walking around and adding theirs. So there was some co-collaboration with that, or co-creation. So let's see what we themed it out. So
look at that, right back to student-centered focus. We were just talking about that in the last theme.
Again, where it bleeds through, and innovative changes and pivots. And what this means is, as far as relevant, when you make decisions, are they relevant to your core values? There's another way to talk about relevance. Is it relevant to the faculty, staff, or students? And I think that's the spin that the groups are putting on it is, are things relevant when they make decisions in the classroom? Is it meaningful and relevant to the students? And also, are all decisions relevant as far as when the students get out there in the real world? Is what they're learning relevant to the students? And so what we were realizing is that word relevant can be applied in a variety of ways.
Yeah, so shifting the lens to high-level concepts really ties in with, like, is this something that can be applied to the real world? Like, how is this used overall? And then innovative changes and pivots goes along with connect and reflect to leverage insights, right? So really come together and talk about what's been working and how can we continue to build upon that? What is it that we still need, and what pivots can we make to get there? And then tapping into the wisdom of a variety of demographics. So thinking about the future, what are the jobs going to be in the future? Like, some of the things that are happening now aren't happening then. I mean, Netflix had to shift from, having their little DVDs mailed out to you to now live streaming, right? They thought about the future. And what is it we like to say? Adapt or die, Jen?
Yes, that's Margaret Wheatley, the organizational development, who's very strength-based, and she's amazing. And the high-level concepts, what also I think what we were thinking of when we recommended that is, there's so many decisions to be making that are finite and specific to a particular circumstance. And so sometimes it's important to just take a pause, take a breath, and go up to that higher level, 30,000 feet, where, well, what is the overall outcome? And do that whole backwards by design or understanding by design, thinking about 1 year from now, what would we want? And then the decisions start to fall into place. What do we need to do right now? So that might happen in 6, 9, 12 months.
All right, so last but not least is non-negotiable. Like, what is non-negotiable for you in your district, in your school? What we heard from the participants was shared leadership. So being able to involve all stakeholders. I love that they pulled that out. All voices are empowered to collaborate, which is part of what we were talking about earlier in building relationships and making sure that everybody feels like they do have a voice, and clear communication of co-created district core values.
And in order to do that, because that is such an essential part of the decision making, how do you build upon all those previous 5 words and make certain practices non negotiable? Is the organic discussions that are guiding decisions, bringing people together. And how might you create a safe space so that people feel comfortable, that they are able to bring their authentic selves to the table? And then finally, just like we did for you, is to leverage tech or leverage all your engagement techniques that you use actually in the classroom sometimes, and actually apply that to the adult conversations. So that way, if you are able to curate a portfolio, if you will, of the discussion and share it out for future visiting, and again, it starts to create this nice narrative and story arc for what you want for your school.
Yeah, and that transparency is so important because it helps to build that safe space for people. All right, so basically what we did with you at this session was a new way of leading, was using a web of wisdom and involving all sorts of different people, all sorts of different stakeholders involved with making those decisions. And the way it's been done in the past is the top down. And we really like this newer web of wisdom because it creates so many more opportunities and ideas and strength for schools and districts, and they become more successful when they're really working together. However, there is one area where we still like the top down. You want to talk about that, Jen?
Well, that is the social emotional learning. And
yeah, we heard that over and over and over and over again at the conference.
That, yes, as a leader, you get to set the tone, and how the students and how the teachers will interact with one another. You can model that, how you interact with the adults and interact with the students. And the same thing where it's very repetitive, and that's why we love these fractals, where it's the same thing over and over again, and it just ripples out and gets larger and larger. And so what we did, if you look at the picture on the right, we had people all around the room, and we didn't really say a whole lot. We gave a couple of words, we gave our definition, and we turned them loose to work their magic, and we trusted the brilliance of the people in the room. And that's what you can do with your conversations as well.
And Jen, when I look at these two models side by side, the one on the left, the top down, I kind of envision it like this, and then it goes in and it's all interconnected, and then it comes back out, and then I see it just kind of flowing like that, right? So that modeling from the leadership, that leading, that true leading is happening, yet we're still incorporating everybody else.
Absolutely. And, there may be some times that you need something on the left, and then there's also times that you need that on the right. And that's where we come in, is to work with you and decide when are those times.
Absolutely.
And then this one, very simply, where are we going within leadership in schools, especially what has been going on in the past year? There's been a whole lot of change. And how do you manage change? And the impulse is that there's a few people who have the answers, and then you disseminate it. And that's how you can get things done faster, because you only have a couple of people and then you spread it out. When really, rather than having a few people with the answers, there are ways to choreograph these interactions so that you have many people tapping into the wisdom of the group with exciting, positively framed questions. And that's that new paradigm that we were talking about, and it's perfect right now because so many things have changed in the past year.
All right, well, that was the recap, the debrief of our session, and we're really excited to see you again in the future at another COSA conference, maybe at your school site or your district site. We do have a survey that we sent out, and we will resend it out with this email so that you can fill out, how this went for you, give us a little feedback so we know what your needs are and we can support you right where you're at.
And we tried to make the survey not necessarily COSA specific, but to anybody, because we are hoping that even people beyond Oregon might be watching this video. And, we hope that this has given you something to think about, some things to consider. And again, like Heidi was saying, you fill out that survey and we will get in touch with you. And we'll look forward to having more of those conversations.
All right, have a happy summer, everyone.
Thanks.